somewhere in this country, right now, there is a woman living 2 blocks from a man the whole world believes is buried in the ground. She waters her plants in the morning. He waters his in the evening. Neither one knows how close they truly are, until the day a scar behind an ear gives away a secret that a coffin, a funeral, and 3 years of grief could not keep hidden. This is the story of Cecilia, a woman who was warned by God before she ever said, "I do," and chose to walk down the aisle anyway. Stay with me, because by the end of this you are going to ask yourself the same question she asked herself for 3 long years. What do you do when the person you buried turns out to be alive, married to someone else, and living right next door? Before we go any further, I want you to do something for me. If stories like this, the kind that make you sit up a little straighter, the kind that remind you life can turn on a single decision, if stories like that speak to you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We tell true-to-life stories like this every single week, and I do not want you to miss the next one. Now, let's get into it. Cecilia was 28 years old when she finally let herself admit the truth. She was tired of waiting. She had spent her 20s believing, the way so many of us are taught to believe, that if you pray long enough and sincerely enough, an answer eventually comes. Not always fast, not always the way you picture it, but it comes. That belief had carried her through the wedding showers of friends, through cousins younger than her walking down the aisle first, through the quiet, cutting comments relatives make at family gatherings when they think you cannot hear them. She smiled through all of it. But underneath the smile, something in her had grown weary of simply waiting on faith. She wanted to see something. She wanted to hold something. She wanted someone standing beside her in the pew instead of an empty space. That was when Henry came into her life. He was not loud. He was not the kind of man who needed a room to notice him when he walked into it. He noticed her instead, the fact that she always lingered after Sunday service, sitting quietly in her seat long after everyone else had filed out to the parking lot. He asked her about it gently, and from that single conversation something simple began. Short walks after church, quiet conversations about the sermon. Prayers that used to be something she whispered alone in her bedroom slowly became something the two of them said together, hand in hand. He prayed like a man who actually knew God, not like a man performing for an audience, and that, more than anything else, made Cecilia feel safe. 3 months into knowing him, her prayers changed. She stopped asking God to simply send her someone, and started asking a much more specific question. Is Henry the one? She wanted a sign. She wanted the kind of overwhelming peace people talk about when they know, beyond doubt, that they've found their person. What she got instead was tension. Small, easy to explain away, but there, like static on a radio station that mostly comes in clear. The first time she felt it was the morning Henry never showed up to a church outreach event they had planned to attend together. No call, no text, nothing until that evening when he finally phoned and gave her almost nothing at all. Something came up, he said. It's handled now. Don't worry about it. And just like that, the conversation was over. She told herself he was simply a private man. Weeks later, when a small problem came up in his electronics business, a supplier issue, nothing catastrophic, Henry did not rise to meet it. He withdrew. His calls got shorter. His texts got slower. And so, without really deciding to, Cecilia stepped into the gap he left behind. She called the suppliers herself. She negotiated the deadlines herself. She solved it the way she would end up solving so many things in the years to come, while Henry sat quietly in the background, waiting for the storm to pass on its own. When she finally asked him about it directly, why do you disappear every time something gets hard? His answer was not really an answer at all. You're a strong woman, he told her. That's one of the things I love about you. It sounded like a compliment. It was actually a deflection. But Cecilia let it go, because everything else about Henry felt right. He was generous even when money was tight. He never wandered. He never played games with her heart. And so she kept repeating to herself the same sentence so many of us have used to talk ourselves into something we already sensed was wrong. No man is perfect. Looking back later, Cecilia would remember those early months as the sweetest kind of ordinary. Sunday lunches that stretched into long afternoon conversations about scripture and about the kind of life they each wanted to build. Henry was not a man who spoke in grand promises. He spoke in small, steady gestures, remembering how she took her coffee, showing up early to help her carry boxes for a church fundraiser, sitting quietly beside her during a difficult week without demanding to know every detail of why she was sad. Her friends told her she had found a rare thing, a man who listened more than he talked, and for a long time she believed they were right. She did not yet understand that a man who listens well can also be a man who has learned, very early in life, how to avoid ever truly being seen. 6 months after they met, Henry proposed to her in a quiet park at sunset. No crowd, no cameras, just him on one knee, telling her he was still figuring a lot of things out in life, but that with her beside him, things could only get better. She said yes through tears. And that same night, after the wedding planning had already begun in full motion, the hall booked, the invitations halfway printed, her mother already crying happy tears on the phone, Cecilia went to God one more time. Lord, she prayed, I'm still waiting on your reply. That night, she had a dream unlike any she had ever had before. She was sitting in a darkness that felt heavier than ordinary darkness, the kind that seems to press down on your chest. Then a light broke through from above, and a voice spoke to her, calm but unmistakable. Cecilia, it said, I warned you. She begged to understand. Lord, how do I get out of this? And the answer came, simple and final. Do not climb the altar. She woke up shaking, in tears, and spent the rest of that night arguing with herself the way people do when they already know the truth, but cannot bear to face what it costs. Henry is the most decent man I have ever met, she told herself. Everyone has flaws. The invitations have already gone out. What will people say if I cancel now? I don't want to be 30 and still unmarried. This is probably just nerves. It's just a dream. The next morning, she put on white and walked down the aisle anyway, believing deep down that God had already spoken to her, and choosing in that single moment not to listen. And here is something worth sitting with for a second. Sometimes the most dangerous place a person can stand is not in silence, waiting for God to answer. It's in the moment right after He already has, when we decide to move forward anyway. The first year of marriage looked, from the outside, exactly like the life Cecilia had prayed for. A small apartment she filled with handmade curtains and potted plants. A husband who worked long hours to grow his business and always found a way to provide, even when things were tight. A framed piece of scripture above their door that read, Trust in the Lord with all your heart, which Henry liked to tease her about, joking that if they trusted the Lord any more than they already did, heaven might start charging them rent. Those were the moments Cecilia held on to, proof she believed that she had chosen well. But underneath that peace, small cracks kept appearing. Henry's cousin, a man named Carter, started showing up more and more often. Something about him unsettled Cecilia in a way she could never quite explain to anyone, including herself. He was polite, he was friendly even, but there was something calculating behind his eyes that she simply did not trust. Henry, on the other hand, trusted Carter completely. We grew up like brothers, he told her. And that seemed to be the end of any conversation about him. One afternoon, dropping off documents at Carter's office on Henry's behalf, Cecilia learned about an expansion plan for Henry's business that her own husband had never once mentioned to her. When she brought it up that evening, Henry did not thank her for caring. He got defensive, told her that his business wasn't her concern, and warned her not to come between him and his family. He apologized minutes later, blaming stress, and she let it go. The same way she had let so many things go already, because loving someone she believed meant being patient with them. There were good stretches, too, long enough that Cecilia could almost forget the uneasy feeling that lived somewhere in the back of her chest. Henry surprised her once with pastries from her favorite bakery for no occasion at all. He rested his hand on her stomach once she became pregnant and spoke softly to the baby, promising to spoil their child rotten. He was never unfaithful, never cruel, never careless with money in any way that suggested selfishness. On Sundays, he worshipped with a kind of open joy that made her fall in love with him all over again. Hands raised, eyes closed. A man who genuinely believed his life was finally coming together the way he had always hoped it would. Outside the church one of those same Sundays, They passed a well-dressed stranger asking passers-by for money, and while Henry dismissed him as one more practiced con artist working the crowd, Cecilia quietly pressed a bill into his hand anyway, telling Henry she had given it as an act of thanksgiving for the baby growing inside her. She had no way of knowing, that ordinary afternoon, that the stranger's face would return to change the entire rest of her life. Then came the night that changed everything. Close to midnight, Henry stumbled through their front door bleeding, badly hurt, refusing at first to say what had happened. The next morning, a doctor stitched up a cut near his ear and called it minor. It was only later, once the doctor had left, that Henry finally told her he had been robbed of every dollar he had saved. $100,000, gone in a single night. Cecilia held him and told him they would rebuild together. What she did not know, and would not know for 3 more years, was that this story was only a fraction of the truth, and the real truth was already being set into motion. Now, before we go further into what happened next, I want to ask you something. If you have ever been the one holding a family together, while someone else quietly fell apart behind closed doors, if you've ever sensed something was wrong long before anyone admitted it to you, put a comment below with the words, "I've been there." I read every single one, and I want to know how many of you have lived a piece of Cecilia's story. In the weeks that followed the robbery, Henry changed. He grew quieter. He stopped sleeping through the night. Carter kept visiting, and their conversations behind closed doors grew tenser each time. Cecilia's pregnancy, meanwhile, moved forward. A small blessing in the middle of growing unease. She noticed Henry glancing at his injured ear with something like guilt whenever Carter looked at it. She noticed the strange, careful way the two men spoke around each other, like men circling a subject too dangerous to name directly. Then, one ordinary afternoon while she was folding baby clothes, her phone rang. A stranger's voice told her that her husband had been in a serious accident and that she needed to come to the hospital immediately. She arrived to find doctors already waiting with the kind of expression that tells you the news before a single word is spoken. Henry, they told her, had not survived. The damage to his body, they said gently, was too severe for her to see him one last time. She did not argue. Grief had already taken from her the strength to resist anything. The funeral happened quickly, almost too quickly. Arranged mostly by Henry's family, with a closed casket Cecilia stared at for a long time, trying to accept that the man she loved was inside it, even though she had never once seen his face to confirm it. That same night, the stress and shock proved too much for her body, and by morning, she had lost the baby as well. In the space of a single week, Cecilia lost her husband, her unborn child, and, though she did not know it yet, every dollar she had left to her name. Loan officers began calling within 2 weeks of the funeral, informing her of debts Henry had taken out that she had never known existed. Tens of thousands of dollars borrowed from people she had never met, now legally her responsibility as his widow. She sold her wedding jewelry first. Then the baby items she and Henry had bought together. Then the furniture, piece by piece, until the apartment echoed when she walked through it. Eventually, she sold the one piece of land her late father had left her, the one thing meant to secure her future no matter what else happened in life. And through all of it, Carter, the cousin who had always known Henry's business, the one man who might have had answers, visited exactly once, dropped off a small envelope of cash, muttered an apology, and disappeared from her life completely. She was humiliated in public more than once by creditors who did not care that her husband was dead, only that his debts were not. At her lowest point, sitting behind a row of market stalls with tears running down her face, Cecilia arrived at a hard and lonely conclusion. There was no one left to blame but herself. The dream came back to her then, clear as the night she'd had it. "I warned you. Do not climb the altar." She had heard the warning and walked forward anyway, and now she was the only one left to carry the weight of that choice. Unable to bear the shame of staying in the city where everyone knew her story, Cecilia eventually packed what little she had left and moved to the small town where she had been born. A place far from the busy life she had known. A place cheap enough to survive in and anonymous enough that nobody there knew about the widow who had buried a husband and lost a child in the same week. She rented a small room with a thin mattress on the floor. Electricity came and went as it pleased. She fetched water from a communal tap outside. It was not much, but it was shelter, and after everything she had lost, shelter was enough. For 2 years, Cecilia survived. She worked as a sales assistant during the day and woke before sunrise to bake and sell cakes on the street. A skill from happier days now turned into pure survival. People in the area began calling her simply the Cake Woman. And there was a strange comfort in that anonymity. Here, no one whispered about her past. Some mornings she sold every last cake on her tray before the sun had even fully risen. Other mornings, she walked home with leftovers and a heavier heart, doing the quiet arithmetic of rent and food in her head the way anyone who has ever lived paycheck to paycheck knows how to do without even trying. She had once paused a graduate program because her fashion business back home was thriving too well to leave behind. She had once dreamed of expanding that business into something bigger, something with her name on the storefront. Now her entire inventory of dreams fit inside a single tiny room. A thin mattress, a small stove, a few baking utensils stacked neatly in the corner. And yet, somehow she kept getting up before dawn. Somehow she kept believing, even when belief cost her more than it seemed to give back. As her 31st birthday approached, an uncomfortable truth settled over her. She had once feared turning 30 unmarried. Now she was almost 31, not unmarried but widowed, and with nothing left to her name. One morning, arriving 10 minutes late to the shop after a customer insisted on buying several cakes, her much younger boss humiliated her publicly in front of a full store, telling her that people like her stayed stuck in life because they were always full of excuses. Cecilia said nothing. She simply absorbed it the way she had absorbed so much else. But that night, alone on the floor of her small dark room, something inside her finally broke, and the memory of that long-ago warning returned to her with brutal clarity. She cried out to God, asking why he had left her here, telling him she finally understood the price of the fears that had once pushed her to disobey him. But that night, as on so many nights before, no answer came. Only silence. The very next morning, though, something had shifted in her. She decided she would not go back to that shop. She knelt on the cold floor of her room and prayed one of the most honest prayers of her life, telling God plainly that she had messed up, that she had disobeyed him, and that the only thing she had left in this world was him. And weeks later, on an ordinary hot afternoon while resting beneath a shade tree with her cake tray beside her, a car pulled up, and a man stepped out and asked to buy something. Cecilia looked up, and recognition hit her immediately. He was the well-dressed beggar she and Henry had encountered outside church years earlier, the man everyone had assumed was running a scam, the man Henry had refused to help and Cecilia had quietly given money to anyway. His name was Daniel, and it turned out he had never been a beggar at all. He was an undercover police officer who had been robbed while working a case in that neighborhood, unable to convince a single passerby that his story was real, until Cecilia had stopped and helped him anyway. He had never forgotten it. They talked for hours that afternoon, and for the first time in years, Cecilia found herself sharing pieces of her story with another human being. Daniel, in turn, told her about his own painful divorce. Something in the way he listened, the way he carried himself without pretense despite the wealth she would later learn he came from, made her feel something she had not let herself feel in a very long time: hope. In the weeks that followed, Daniel became the kind of man Cecilia never expected to find twice in one lifetime. He helped her enroll again in the graduate program she had abandoned years earlier when her business had still been thriving. He arranged a remote analyst position that put her education and background to real use. Eventually, he even helped relocate her to a new city near her university, into an apartment brighter and more comfortable than anything she had lived in even during her marriage. She discovered, almost by accident, that Daniel came from a wealthy and respected family, and that he worked as a detective not out of need, but out of genuine love for uncovering the truth. And still, he carried himself like an ordinary man. The same humility he'd shown the day a stranger with an expensive car mistook him for nothing more than a beggar on the street. Daniel had a way of making her laugh at moments she least expected it, and a way of asking questions that made her feel like her opinions actually mattered to someone, perhaps for the first time since her father had passed away. He never once made her feel like a charity case, even though he had quietly rebuilt her entire life from the ground up. He simply told her, again and again, that kindness deserves to be repaid, and that he had never once forgotten the day a struggling cake seller stopped to help a stranger everyone else had written off. Cecilia began to let herself imagine a future again. Not the loud, certain kind of future she had imagined with Henry, but a quieter, steadier one, built on two people who had both been broken and had chosen honesty with each other anyway. Life, for the first time in years, felt whole again. Until the day new neighbors moved in next door. If you are still with me at this point in the story, I want you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment below with the words, "I'm still here." Let's find out together just how many of you are truly following this story all the way to the end. Because what happens next is going to change everything you think you understand about this man Henry. At first, Cecilia paid the new neighbors no attention at all. People move in and out of apartment buildings constantly. But one afternoon, arriving home with her arms full of groceries, she noticed a tall, broad-shouldered man speaking quietly on the phone near the stairwell. Something about him made her stop walking. The shape of his jaw. The way he leaned slightly to one side while he talked. A distant, uncomfortable memory stirred in her chest, and just as quickly, she pushed it away. People resemble each other all the time, she told herself. She heard someone call him by name in the hallway later that evening. Abel, and the tension in her chest loosened immediately. Not Henry, just a man who looked a little like him. She laughed quietly at her own imagination and went back inside. But over the following weeks, she kept seeing him, in the hallway, in the parking lot, early in the mornings on her way to class. Each time, small details nagged at her. His posture. The particular pause he took before speaking, exactly like someone she used to know. Then, one afternoon, walking past an open balcony, she saw him laughing with a woman she had never met, his arm resting easily beside her on the railing. And as he turned his head, Cecilia saw it clearly for the first time. A faint scar along the edge of his ear. Her breath caught in her throat. That scar. The night Henry had come home bleeding. The doctor cleaning that exact wound. 3 years had passed. She had buried him. She had watched his coffin lowered into the ground with her own eyes. This had to be a coincidence. It had to be. That night, sleep abandoned her entirely. Over the following weeks, Cecilia began to unravel in ways she could not explain to anyone, including Daniel, who noticed her exhaustion and her scattered attention but accepted her excuse of simple stress. She searched the internet late at night for explanations, terrified she was either losing her mind or being haunted by a man who should have been at peace. She kept asking herself the same impossible question, over and over, what does the dead have to do with the living? Then came the day that answered it. Stepping out of the elevator, Cecilia found herself standing only a few feet from the man calling himself Abel, closer than she had ever been to him before. Their eyes met, and for one unguarded second, his expression was not confusion or polite indifference. It was fear. Real, unmistakable fear, the kind that only appears on the face of someone who has just been recognized by a person they never expected to see again. Her voice came out before she could stop it. Henry. He froze completely. Then he shook his head, forced a confused smile, and told her firmly that his name was Abel, and that she must have him confused with someone else. But Cecilia stepped closer, studying every feature of his face, and she knew, without a shadow of doubt, exactly who was standing in front of her. You died 3 years ago, she said, her voice shaking. I buried you. His eyes flicked nervously toward the hallway, and he told her he was married now, with a young daughter, practically begging her not to frighten them. He insisted he was not a ghost, offered a hollow apology for her loss, and tried to walk away. That was when his apartment door opened and a woman stepped out, holding the hand of a small girl no older than 4. The woman's eyes moved between Cecilia and the man beside her, confusion and suspicion already forming on her face. What is happening? She asked. The man insisted it was nothing, just a misunderstanding, and urged the woman back inside. But Cecilia spoke one more time before the door shut between them, softer now but unmistakably certain. Henry. He paused, just for a fraction of a second, before disappearing behind the closing door, and Cecilia was left standing alone in the hallway, her heart pounding so loudly it seemed to fill the entire corridor. And one single, Devastating thought kept repeating in her mind louder than anything else. If that man was truly Henry, then whose body had she actually buried? The truth came fully into the light only days later, and in the most painful way possible. Daniel had picked Cecilia up that afternoon, oddly quiet, asking her strange, pointed questions about ghosts and about whether she had ever lied to him. Before she could piece together what was happening, a familiar voice called out from the sidewalk. The same man, holding a little girl in his arms, laughing as though nothing in the world was wrong. Daniel's expression hardened instantly. It turned out he had already crossed paths with this same man earlier that day and had been assured, falsely, that everything between him and Cecilia was fine and settled. Believing he had been lied to and used, a heartbroken Daniel drove away without another word, blocking every possible way Cecilia had of reaching him. Left alone with Henry in the parking lot, Cecilia finally heard the entire truth pour out of him. His cousin Carter had convinced him to take out a massive loan for an investment that turned out to be a total scam. When Henry lost everything and confronted the men responsible, he had been beaten badly. That was the real story behind the night he came home bleeding, not a robbery at all. Drowning in debt and shame, and even considering ending his own life, Henry had let Carter talk him into a different escape entirely. Fake his death, disappear completely, and start over as someone new. Someone with no debts and no failures attached to his name. He admitted that he had told himself again and again that Cecilia deserved someone better than the mess he had made of his life. He confessed that Carter had loaned him money to rebuild his new identity, and that he had lost all contact with his cousin afterward. Standing there, hearing it all at once, Cecilia finally said aloud everything she had swallowed for years, that she had seen the warning signs long before their wedding day, that she had been the one holding their household together through every crisis while he quietly hid from every challenge, that his cousin had effectively taken his place as a partner while she was pushed to the side, and that in the end, his cowardice had cost her the child they lost together and 3 years of her life. She would never get back. And yet, even in her anger, she told him plainly that she had already forgiven him, but that forgiveness would not erase what he needed to do next. He had to go to Daniel and tell him the truth. That man, she told him, was the very same stranger they had once dismissed outside a church years ago. The beggar Henry had walked past and Cecilia alone had chosen to help. Later that night, Cecilia tried calling Daniel repeatedly. Every number, every message, every social account came back the same way. Blocked. Meanwhile, across the hallway, Henry's new wife confronted him with a devastation of her own, having overheard everything from her window. She packed a bag and left with their daughter, telling him plainly that she no longer recognized the man she had married. That night, sitting alone in the dark the way he always had whenever life became too heavy to face, Henry finally understood something about himself that had taken him years and 2 ruined lives to learn. Running had never once solved anything. It had only ever made the wreckage bigger. And so, for the first time in his life, he chose to stop running. The next morning, he walked into the local police station and asked to speak with the detective in charge, not realizing until the office door opened that the detective waiting for him was Daniel himself. Henry confessed everything, calmly and completely. His real name, the fake death, Carter's scheme, the fraudulent loan, the staged accident, all of it. Daniel listened in stunned silence before finally telling him plainly that what he had just described amounted to multiple serious criminal charges. Henry did not argue. He said only that his conscience had brought him there, that he had caused 2 women enormous pain, and that Cecilia, more than anyone, deserved a chance at real happiness after everything he had put her through. 3 days later, Daniel finally called Cecilia and asked to meet her at a quiet cafe. She braced herself for the worst, but instead, Daniel told her that Henry had turned himself in of his own free will, confessing to everything. The fraud, the fake death, Carter's involvement in what was quickly becoming a much larger criminal investigation. As the case unfolded in the weeks that followed, Carter was arrested and revealed as the true mastermind behind the entire scheme, a fraud designed from the very beginning to bleed Henry dry, while Carter profited quietly behind the scenes. The story became national news, though Cecilia herself chose to stay far from the cameras and the headlines. She had already lived through more pain than she ever wanted the world to see. Instead, She quietly returned to her studies, her work, and the slow, steady process of rebuilding a life on her own terms. One evening, Daniel invited her for a walk beside the river as the sun went down. He told her he owed her an apology for leaving the way he had, for not trusting her enough in that terrifying, confusing moment. She told him gently that she understood, that the situation had looked impossible to explain from where he stood. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Daniel stopped walking altogether, visibly nervous for the first time since she had known him. He told her that life had not been fair to either of them, that trust did not come easily to people who had been hurt the way they both had, but that he wanted to build something honest with her all the same. And then he asked her to marry him. She said yes. And as the sun disappeared behind the water, Cecilia leaned gently against his shoulder, finally understanding something it had taken her a decade of heartbreak to learn. That sometimes God's answer to our prayers is not silence at all. Sometimes it is a warning we are too afraid to hear the first time, and a second chance we almost do not deserve, waiting patiently on the other side of everything we lose in between. If the story moved you even half as much as it moved me putting it together, do one more thing before you go. Share it with someone in your life who needs to hear that it is never too late for the truth to come out, and never too late to build something honest after everything falls apart. And while you're at it, subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next story like this one. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I will see you in the next one.